For our PE practical session, we decided to teach volleyball. One of the aims of the national curriculum is to provide pupils with an introduction to the essential knowledge that they need to be educated citizens. It introduces pupils to the best that has been thought and said and helps engender an appreciation of human creativity and achievement. PE especially allows for human creativity as a subject itself, and our session allowed for students to be creative in the ways they problem solved. Our session incorporated well into the national curriculum as it was a different activity many hadn't taken part in before, increasing the variety. We encouraged students to use different tactics to score points against opponents, e.g. the spike, and we saw developments as teams and as individuals as the session progressed. One challenge we instantly faced was the lack of equipment, meaning we had to adapt our lesson play to only use 2 badminton nets and 2 volleyballs. Being able to adapt is important during PE sessions, as many different factors such as equipment, weather and ability may affect how the session can be ran. Our lesson followed the Teaching Games for Understanding model shown on the screen. Kirk and McPhail described the model as a framework of gameplay, where modifications occur to help develop learners using techniques and drills, whilst continually challenging them in terms of game appreciation, decision-making and techniques. The first thing we did in our session was to split the groups into 2 and allow them to get a feel for the game and develop game appreciation. We then brought them back together and spoke to them about the specific focus for the lesson. We also asked them questions about what techniques and tactics they may use to get the ball over the net in the most effective way. We then split them back into 2 groups and got them into doing a drill, where one person fed the ball to someone who spiked it over the net. One thing I noticed when I was doing the drill was that the boys were becoming disengaged because they found the task too easy. I therefore had to adapt again and turn the drill into a more competitive game-based activity. After this, we then got everyone involved in one game together. Active learning time was an element important to me as a teacher because I believe the students learn best when they are doing rather than listening to the teacher describe what they should be doing. I wanted the learners to spend as much time playing volleyball as possible, so this is what I did. Mostyn and Ashworth created a teaching style spectrum as shown. The left-hand side of the spectrum focuses on teacher-centered styles, while the right-hand focuses on being more learner-centered. I believe the teaching style we used is closely associated with the guided discovery style. Guided discovery allows students to be involved in the thinking process behind a movement, but the answer has been predetermined by the teacher. We had predetermined the objective of the class to be on the spike, but wanted the students to problem solve and uncover ways in which best to achieve this. Because all the students were novices to the sport, it was important we gave them some structure to understand the basics of volleyball and the key components needed to be successful. As I develop as a PE teacher, the more expert students become, I believe it is more important to give them more control over their learning, and therefore we use techniques further to the right-hand side of the scale, such as individual program and learner initiative. Light recorded that more positive learning comes from student-centered approaches, as conversations between students are reflective and learning through experience develops deeper understanding between practice and games. One of the learning theories present in our session was cognitivism. Cognitivism is a theory in which we attempt to understand the process between stimuli and response. Cognitivists such as Paget and Lewin state that this theory attempts to look inside the black box of the mind. The mind is considered to be like a computer in that it processes the information we give to it. During our session, we broke the volleyball play down into 3 sections: dig, set, and spike. We broke the task down into steps to make it easier for the learners to practice each one individually and then perform them in a sequence as a team. This allowed the students to actively understand what they were trying to achieve, which was important for the technical aspects we were trying to engage them with. By breaking it down into 3 sections, I believed it allowed them to see how it fit in within a game context and allowed for a clear understanding of the 3 passes needed for a successful point win. Ultimately, the aim of volleyball is to get the ball on the floor, on the opposition side of the net, which is why we decided to focus on the spike, as this will be the element that achieves this aim. As the students were novices to volleyball, I think it was important to use this learning theory as a method of teaching for the reasons previously stated. However, I do believe that if we had used too much of this theory, the learners would have become passive in their learning. In order to make sure they were more active, we allowed them free rein in figuring out how all the moves linked together. As Paulo Freire stated, teaching is a process of living, and it is important for students to problem solve and adapt themselves. This is why we then incorporated a constraints-based approach into our sessions as well. As you can see from Newell's model of constraints, this theory is based upon three different elements: task, environment, and organism. Task constraints are the easiest to manipulate by the teacher, which is therefore what we did. We constrained students by saying they were only allowed 3 touches on their side of the net until it had to be passed back to the other side. We did this with the intention of them using these 3 passes as the dig, set and spike, which was learnt in the previous drills and through the previous techniques they had been focusing on in the lesson. During the game at the end, it was clear to see the dig, set, spike sequences coming into the gameplay, which was great to see as it meant students had understood the drills and were understanding how to take this into a game. By adding in different constraints to a session, it meant students had to reorganize and work out a way around the challenge placed in front of them. Right at the end of the game, we took away the constraints and said they could have as many or little passes as they liked before they had to hit it back over the net. This resulted in play becoming more chaotic and the sense of volleyball and the dig, set and spike sequence was lost. Therefore, this showed why constraints are important within lessons, as it provides students with a meaningful task and it had showed that they had learnt through the drills before. By making it too chaotic, the sense of learning decreased and the progress made through the session was lost, whereas when the constraints were in place, we could see how they were using the drills in the game. Assessment for learning is an approach in which teachers' assessment become meaningful and embedded within the curriculum, with students understanding their own progress through learning intentions and what they need to do to improve. As developing as a teacher, I will incorporate more key assessment for learning principles so that my students can understand what they need to improve on and how they can do this. I need to give more feedback to students and question them on how they think they are progressing so they can understand their own personal development in the sport. In regards to my future development as a PE teacher, I will use teaching styles that are more learner-centered. In a review of studies done by Chatterpulse, he concluded that undergraduate teachers should be encouraged to use a broad range of teaching styles, with a larger focus being placed on learner-centered practices. I believe learner-centered practices allow for more student engagement and appreciation of the game, whereas teacher-centered styles are used by teachers just to maintain control of students who may be disruptive. I do believe that the learning theories I used were effective for the session. Cognitivism was important for the learners to understand the passes and the sequence they should be performed in, as they were all new to volleyball, while the constraints-led approach allowed for emergent movement patterns to be exploited through the game-based task using elements learnt through the cognitive learning, such as the dig, set and spike. A whistle would have been effective in the learning environment to maintain a bit more control over the students, especially as a lot of other sessions were taking part in the hall at the same time and it was difficult to get everyone in at once. Overall, I believe that the students did learn during the session, as we could see in the game at the end that they had brought the tactics and skills they had learned in the drills come into the game. At the beginning of the session, the rallies over the net were short, but they became longer and passes between teammates became more accurate. I think volleyball is a difficult session to teach and would take more than 6 or 7 weeks, which is the average block of time for a sport in the curriculum, for students to master, as many won't play this sport outside of school. We had positive feedback from students saying they enjoyed the lesson, which was important in order to keep the students engaged. The main thing I will take away from this lesson is the importance of the learners being at the centre of the lesson and adapting to their skill levels, making it more enjoyable for them. By teaching this PE session, it allowed me to see my strengths and weaknesses as a PE teacher, and then through this presentation analyse myself and see how I can make my lessons more learner-centred by giving the students more control of how and what to focus on. Thank you for listening.